Well, hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I'm Shelli Brunswick, a global thought leader, author, futurist, and excited to be speaking with you today about what space got to do with it. 10 life lessons for personal growth. So, you're going to get a sneak peek at my upcoming book that's coming out in December. And we're going to go through a few of those lessons of what does space have to do with everything and how can it help you? So what I look at is how my journey in the space industry has culminated. I have four distinct chapters in the space industry. One was I enlisted in the U.S. Air Force right out of high school because I did not have college money. I wasn't sure what I wanted to study, and I wanted to see the world. And the best way to do that at that time was to join the military. And so I was so fortunate. I was stationed in places like Turkey. So, Arda, I know you're with us from Turkey. I was stationed in Germany. I was stationed in Colorado Springs. And then after 12 years as an enlisted airman, I had completed my college education going to school at night. So I applied and became an officer in the Air Force. And by becoming an officer in the Air Force, they made me a space program manager, or as they call it in the military, space acquisitions. And then that started my 25-year career in the space industry. So that's the second chapter of my journey, being that officer in the Air Force, doing space acquisition as a program manager, working with satellites and rockets and ground stations. I taught space acquisition at Defense Acquisition University, and I culminated my time in the Air Force working on Capitol Hill as a legislative liaison. So understanding how the policies and space law and securing funding and advocacy are for the Air Force. And after an amazing career in the Air Force, I retired and started the third chapter of my journey, which was becoming the chief operating officer at Space Foundation. And Space Foundation is a U.S. nonprofit that does business internationally. And one of the things they're most known for is their annual Space Symposium conference that brings together the global space community. And as of this year, 2024, so that will date our recording a little bit, I launched my own company called SB Global LLC. And the reason I wanted to do that is I really wanted to give back. I had been a mentor with many programs like GPODs, the Global Policy, Diplomacy, and Sustainability program, with Women Tech Network, with UNUSA Space for Women program, and some other mentoring programs. And what I learned is there are so many people that really need great information and insights on what are the tools and opportunities to not only come into the space industry, but into the STEM professions, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, or to be entrepreneurs, or to ultimately find their way. And so what I decided to do this year was launch my speaking, being a global speaker, and then writing a book, and then being a futurist and doing some strategic advising. So those are the four chapters of my journey. And what we're going to do over the next 30 minutes is we're going to kind of talk a little bit about all of those. So I can see you, but I can't see the chat. So if you put some questions in there, what I'll do is I'll talk for a little while and then I'll come off and we can have a discussion. Or if you raise your hand, since I can see you, if you raise your hand, I'll be able to take your questions. So we'll do that. So that first lesson that I learned was to seize every opportunity. Now, sometimes we don't know what opportunities are. They might look like hard work, or it might be volunteering, or it might be joining Julio on the weekend to talk about what space got to do with it. But those are opportunities. And so one of the opportunities I was able to take advantage of is right when I enlisted in the Air Force. Again, I didn't have college money, so I wasn't able to go to college first. But by working in the military during the day, I was able to go to school at night, taking advantage of tuition assistance that helped pay for my schooling and my books. So after the course of time, I was able to complete both my master's and bachelor's degree going to school at night. So taking advantage of those opportunities. And yes, you have to prioritize. You might have to give up some time with friends, or when they're off doing fun things on the weekend, I was off having fun going to school. But that opened up new opportunities and doorways for me. And in the book that's coming out in December, I interviewed three global thought leaders for this chapter. I actually interviewed over 200 global thought leaders before writing the book, but I included the stories from three thought leaders specifically in this chapter. And you can see pictures of the three individuals I interviewed. Now, Julio, you may be familiar with Her Excellency, Dr. Rosalia Arteaga, the first woman president of Ecuador. I also interviewed Antonio Stark, who's an amazing space advocate from Korea, and of course, Dr. Chidima Joy Iroka um, from Nigeria. So I interviewed some different people from different parts of the world to get their perspective and insights of what they thought about opportunities. Because again, I was looking at opportunities from the United States, from being in the military, but I wanted to get different points of view to understand if what I was seeing as opportunities were universal truths. And what I did find out is, although the book may talk about what space got to do with it, these life lessons will work for anyone in any background from any part of the world. Now, we'll talk a little bit about Dr. Iroka and her taking advantage of every opportunity. And that's what she did in her profession. She saw an opportunity to apply to work for the Nigerian Space Agency. And she took the test and then she passed it and she was able to get hired in. And then opportunities came along. There were opportunities to write articles or do research or do other things that she volunteered for. She raised her hand and said, I'll do those hard projects. I want to learn. I want to grow. And she seized those opportunities, and that allowed her to not only get a position at the Nigerian Space Agency, but also now she's the assistant director and the head for satellite and navigation systems. So take advantage of these opportunities. And again, sometimes those opportunities look like work, or you might have to give up your weekends and evenings and volunteer for them. But at the end of the day, they will pay off. And Richard Branson once said, if someone offers you an amazing opportunity, but you're not sure you can do it, say yes. Then learn how to do it later. So that's one of the things. I see you smiling, Arda, and I see that you've taken advantage of opportunities as well. So that is the first lesson. And of course, there's a lot more insight in the book as you read the chapter, as well as the other stories. And the other thing that's in the book that's really helpful that I've put in there is insights into action, how you can take some of these ideas and what are the next steps to help you put these things into work in your daily life as well. So it's not just hearing my story or the global thought leaders, it's what can you do next and what actions can you take? So that next lesson in the book is about defying gravity. You know, we need to try anyways. Sometimes we feel the odds are against us and that if we try to do something, it might not work out. So one of the things I share is that when I applied to become an officer in the Air Force and I'd been going to school at night, I completed my bachelor's degree, which was a requirement to apply to become an officer in the Air Force. Now, the challenge was the Air Force was looking for STEM professionals, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I did not have a degree in that. I have a business degree. I have an undergraduate in business and I have an MBA. So I'm not a STEM professional. So my odds of being selected to be in the to become an officer in the Air Force were only 12%. Not really good odds, but I tried anyways. I knew that I needed to try so that I would always know for myself because you don't want to look back someday and regret and wonder what if you had tried or wish you had tried. So I applied to become an officer and I waited and I got the results and I was not selected to become an officer in the Air Force. So I was disappointed, but I was already thinking, what's going to be plan B? What's going to be plan C? So you should always be thinking, this is my first choice, but if this doesn't happen, what am I doing to prepare for this choice? Or what am I doing to prepare for this opportunity? Now, the thing I did do at that time is the Air Force allows you to submit your application to a following officer selection board. So what I did is I updated my application, I rewrote my essay, I reformatted things, I went back to the individuals that had done letters of recommendation, I updated my letters of recommendation. I made sure my application was the best it could be. Now again, I realized more than likely I'm not going to be selected, but I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to do the best I can to put my best foot forward. And if it doesn't happen, then I'm planning for plan C, plan D, plan E for what might happen next. And went about doing those other plans, and I waited, and I found out that on the second selection board, I was selected to become an officer in the Air Force. So I was elated. I'm going to be an officer in the Air Force now. What next? But before we jump into that, let's talk about trying anyways. What are some other people that have experienced that? Now, some of you may know Ben Haldeman or Sejal Buthalia or Priscilla Nowajewski. Now, Priscilla is part of the UNUSA Space for Women, and she's in Chile. She works at Alma. Ben is an entrepreneur, and Sejal is completing her PhD in Europe right now, but she's from India. And I, again, had interviewed 200 people before I wrote the book, but I included these three stories from these amazing individuals in this chapter about trying anyways. And the story I'm going to share with you is about Priscilla. So she has an amazing story. Initially, she was going to get a PhD in one area, and it was really difficult. She really was passionate about it, but it wasn't coming easy. She wasn't thinking this was the right course. And eventually she realized she was on the wrong path. Now she's getting a master's in a PhD program. And so to stop means that you lose all that time and all the work you've done. But she knew she was on the wrong path and she changed her PhD and went in a different direction. And as soon as she did that, things became easier. The courses became more exciting. And she realized, I'm on the right path now. So sometimes you might try something and it doesn't quite feel right. It might not be the right path. And that's okay to try things, or it's even okay to fail. Some people think fail is a terrible word, and Arda heard this word in another session I had earlier today, but failure is actually Fail, fail. First attempt in learning. It's okay to fail. Just learn from those opportunities. And now, like I said, Priscilla works at Alma, which is an observatory in Chile. It's an amazing place. She's also part of the Mars Society Chile. And for those of you listening, the Mars Society is a global organization. They have chapters around the world. So if you're not part of any space organizations or you're interested in being part of space organizations, the Mars Society could be a way, because for Priscilla, this was part of her finding her right way into the space industry. And as Elon Musk says, when something is important enough, you do it, even if the odds are not in your favor. So think about when he decided to start SpaceX. There were no commercial rocket companies. I mean, today you hear about successful launches all the time. I believe I heard Gwen Shotwell last week said that they've done 100 launches this year. But that wasn't the norm when the U.S. government, Congress, passed a legislation called Commercial Crew. That was in 2004. That allowed private companies to launch rockets. Up until then, only the government launched rockets. NASA, or the U.S. Air Force. Space Force didn't exist then. But in 2004, the U.S. government passed policy. So that's why it's really important. As Arda just completed a program in policy, space policy is so important because that policy was passed that allowed commercial companies like SpaceX, Rocket Lab, Blue Origin to start to come into the market and create opportunities, create entrepreneurship. And the amazing thing about SpaceX is because they do reusability, they're landing boosters, they've lowered the cost of launch. And by lowering the cost of launch, they've now allowed access for universities, for smaller countries, for emerging space nations to now be able to put satellites into orbit. So that is one of the amazing things about policy creates the economic opportunity that creates opportunity to drive other unintended consequences or benefits. So obviously, when the U.S. government passed commercial crew legislation, they didn't realize in 20 years that this would lower the cost of launch and allow emerging space nations and universities to now launch payloads into space. But that was one of the wonderful benefits of that legislation from 20 years ago. So for those of you who are thinking about going into policy or international affairs or space law, you are really shaping the future of the space industry by the legislation you craft and create. So it's critically important in those roles because it unlocks entrepreneurship and economic development. Now, that third chapter of my journey is called Embracing the Uncharted Cosmos or Conquering the Fear of the Unknown. And what I mean by that is, so you remember now I was an enlisted airman and I'd just been selected to become an officer in the Air Force, and they selected me to become a space acquisition officer. Well, I don't know what that is. I didn't know what it was then, and I didn't want to do it. And nobody I talked to, I was like, what is this? Nobody knew what it was. It was this great unknown. I don't want to do it because I was in personnel. I was human resources. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a personnel officer. Those are the people I knew. That is what I knew. It was my comfort zone. Now, fortunately, in the Air Force, in the military, they don't normally give you a choice. So, although I was asking my mentors to call the Air Force Personnel Center to reclassify me from space acquisition officer to personnel officer, during that time, I got a call from somebody at the Air Force Personnel Center, and he said, Sergeant Brunswick, the Air Force needs you to be a space acquisition officer. And with that, I saluted smartly and said, yes, sir. And I became a space acquisition officer. Now, that decision that the Air Force made for me started my 25-year career in the space industry. So I'm deeply grateful the Air Force did not give me a choice. I'm sure I would have been a wonderful personnel officer, but I'm so much more excited to be with you today talking about space and the opportunities in the space industry and all the adjacent industries that relate to space. So for this chapter, I also interviewed three different people. Some of you may know Roger Spitz. He's a futurist. Stella Lupashore, she's a HR expert, as well as Michelle DeValley, who has not only had been a doctor in pharmaceuticals, but now runs a FinSat company using space technology in the real estate market to look at disaster relief and economics. So I interviewed different people for this chapter as well. Very exciting. The one that I'll highlight to you today is Roger Spitz. Now, he's a futurist. So some people think, well, I've never heard of that. So again, here's a new career opportunity you may not have thought of. So you could be that space policy person. You could be a program manager. You could be a STEM professional. You could be a futurist. So what Roger talks about is, uncertainty is the only thing we really know. The future is unknown, but we have the opportunity every day to make decisions that can lead to the future outcomes we want. Now, he just came out with a book called Disrupt with Impact. Achieve business success in an unprecedented world. He also has some guidebooks out on various economic sectors and being a futurist. One of those guidebooks talks about the space industry. So again, I highlight, don't fear the unknown, embrace it. Um, for our ladies on the call today, I like to highlight Pulitzer Prize winning author Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, who says, well-behaved women rarely make history. Well, that applies to just about everybody in the space industry, because in the space industry, you're making history every day. You're going to new planets. You're exploring new things. You're looking for water. You're looking for life on other planets. We're looking to take the Artemis program, which is Artemis is the Greek god who's the twin sister of Apollo. So the Apollo program was 60 years ago when we went to the moon and returned. Artemis, the twin sister of Apollo, is about going to the moon together as humanity, and this time to stay and then go on to Mars. So let's not be well-behaved people in the space industry. Let's create new technologies, new opportunities, new pathways. And the great thing about the space industry is when we create that technology to go to the moon and Mars and beyond, we can bring that technology back to Earth to better life every day. Like right now, I'm talking to you on Zoom. In all of telecommunication was designed during the Apollo era to talk to astronauts. And then that technology was commercialized. And look at all the technology we're now using, especially that has grown since COVID. We have Zoom, we have WhatsApp, we have all these new telecommunication platforms. So it's a wonderful opportunity. So let's make history together. Now, one of the other things I highlight is that life happens beyond your desk. Now, yes, I'm sitting at my desk talking with you today. So fortunately, with Zoom and all this great technology, we can get up from behind our desk and meet people from around the world. But I highlight that many times we do have to meet people. We can't just sit behind our desk and work and do our tasks and go home and come back and work. We really need to get out from behind our desk. We need to expand our horizons, especially in the space industry. So I'll share with you when I was an officer in the Air Force, one of the places I was stationed was at the Pentagon and I was doing personnel, looking at key uh, positions for space acquisition officers. Where were they located? What were their credentials and their criteria? And it was good, but I really was looking for what's the next thing. And I'd been doing it for 6 months. And there was this big event taking place that an organization was putting on to celebrate all the Air Force acquisition people that were in the Pentagon. It was a salute to them and an honor to honor all the hard work they were doing. And I kept asking everybody in my office, are you going to go to this event? Are you going to go to this event? Are you going to go to this event? And nobody wanted to go to it because it was after work hours. Everybody just wanted to go home. And I had only been there 6 months, so I didn't really know very many people either. But I did decide to go. I decided to go to this event. I decided to get out from behind my desk. And I went to the event and I looked around the room and I maybe knew one or two people. And so I just slowly went around the room and said hello to the people I knew and introduced myself. But there was one person there that I did know, and that was my boss's boss's boss. We call him a senior executive in the military. So he was not in the military, he was in the civil servant side, but he was a senior executive. He's the equivalent of a general officer. Now, fortunately, I knew him because 2 months before that event, I had raised my hand and volunteered to serve as his executive officer for 2 weeks while his executive officer went on vacation. Now you might think, well, big deal. You were his executive officer. Let me highlight, being an executive officer, you only work half days. 12 hours a day. So it's only a half day, 12 hours. You're there before the senior executive comes into the office. You're there all day at your desk supporting that senior executive, calls, moving paper, looking at priorities, who's he going to see, and then you're there after he leaves to make sure everything's ready for the next day. So for 2 weeks, you're working a lot of time, you're sacrificing time with your family. But it was a great learning experience because I learned how he thought. I want to become a senior executive. I want to become a general. I was back, remember, I was in the military, so I wanted to be a general. So I'm thinking, I want to learn from this person. So getting 2 weeks with him was such an amazing opportunity because he would stay after work. He would talk to me. He asked me what I wanted to do next. He knew who I was. We really had an opportunity. He got to know me and I really got to know how he thinks. So anytime you can volunteer to be around senior executives, whether in a company or in the military or at a university, learn from them. You know, learn as much as you can, ask questions, hear what they have to say. It helps you grow and develop and find your pathway. So here I am at this reception that, remember, nobody in my office wanted to go. And here in the room is my boss's boss's boss, the senior executive that I had volunteered to work for 2 months ago. So I made my way over and I said hello. And he's like, Brunswick, what have you been up to? And what I noticed is he was talking to another gentleman. And what I found out is this person worked on Capitol Hill. He was the senior executive's legislative liaison working on Capitol Hill. And he has a new assignment and he was going to be moving to a new location and they needed to find somebody new for the job. Think about timing. Here I am. The senior executive knows me. I volunteered. He knows that I'm looking for my next opportunity. He looked at this person. He looked at me. He looked back at this person and he said, Brunswick, how would you like to be a legislative liaison? Now, what I highlight is he didn't give me the job. What he did give me was the opportunity to interview for the job. And I talked to the person who was in the job at the time so I could learn how to prepare for the interview. I practiced what would be important to them, what skills did they need, what could I bring to be a valuable contributor to their team. I interviewed for the job and I got it. And that was the job I did for the last 5 years I worked. I worked on in the Air Force. I worked on Capitol Hill, securing the budget for the Air Force. I was a budget and appropriation liaison. So when you work in the U.S., there's two forms of legislation on Capitol Hill. There's authorizations with authorized programs, and there's appropriations, and appropriations fund programs. That's real money going to programs so they can execute. So I learned all about how policy works, how legislation works, how to educate and advocate on behalf of the Air Force. Now, I wasn't a lobbyist because in the military you don't lobby, but you educate and you help members of Congress and senators understand what the military is doing, why these programs are important. Why is space important? What's space got to do with it? So it's a wonderful opportunity. But it all happened because one, I volunteered. Remember the first lesson, take advantage of opportunities, and that could be volunteering and doing hard work. And now I got out from behind my desk. So for this chapter, I interviewed three amazing thought leaders, Monique Monroe, Brian Talibi, and Ku Wang. So for those of you who are not familiar, Ku Wang is part of the Carmen Fellows program. So for those of you who are looking for fellowship programs, one of the great ones is the Carmen Fellowship Program. So you can list that as something to check out. Now, Brian is an amazing entrepreneur. He started the company Ahura AI. I met him at Davos in 2024. And Monique Monroe has a amazing background and she does a lot in blockchain. So again, space, but all these other emerging technologies, AI, blockchain are all part of the future, not only of space, but future industries, future jobs, future careers. So I wanted to make sure I interviewed all these individuals so that you, when you buy the book or get the Kindle download, could hear about these amazing opportunities. Now, the story I'll talk about is Brian Talibi. He's an amazing entrepreneur. He started working at NASA when he was 16 years old, started multiple companies, some of them very challenges, maybe had to stay on people's couches while they were going through financial challenges. But what he highlights is how important getting out from behind your desk is, not just for you to go out and meet people, but it's also important when you're a leader to get out from behind your desk and go be with your team, that you'll do whatever they need to do. If they're working 12, 16-hour days, you're there with them. You're leading from the front, they call it. So it's really important that when you're a leader, you're leading from the front, that you're not sitting 20, 30 years ago, you would call it the ivory tower. CEOs were, they were in a corner office somewhere in the top penthouse of a building and you never saw them. Nowadays, leadership is about being there. One of the things I learned in the Air Force from another amazing general officer I worked for was General Al Flowers. He taught me about the importance of leadership by walking around, where you get up from behind your desk and you go walk around where your team are and you go sit in their office and you talk to them and ask them how things are going. You don't ask them to come to you. You go to them and meet them where they're at and learn from them and that's how you get a lot of great insight. So leading by walking around, leadership by walking around is another great thing. So I kind of highlighted before, a lot of us are locked in that comfort zone, but a lot of times the magic of the future or future opportunities happens in this other bubble, and you've got to get out of your comfort zone and go to where the magic happens. And that may or may not be physical. It could be online, like joining us today for this discussion. It could be joining Company Grade Officers Council. It could be uh, looking at the UNUSA space website. UNUSA, the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, has a space for women, a space for youth, a space for water, a space for agriculture. They have policy, they have law. So it could just be looking at what's available for resources and organizations and networks you can join to help you get out of that comfort zone and get to where the magic happens. So I like to highlight this getting out from behind your desk from Michelangelo. You know, the greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that it's too low and we reach it. So always keep reaching for the stars. So, Julio, I'll check. I'm happy to do one more lesson, or if we're at time, I know we're a little over. I just kind of wanted to see if you are happy with me doing one more lesson learned, or if what does everybody think? Do they want one more?
Yes, you can go.
Okay, so we'll do one more lesson. I know we have 30 minutes, so I want to be respectful of all your time. But that next lesson is called Orbiting Connections, the importance of relationships. Now, one of the things is when I became that legislative liaison, I went to work on Capitol Hill. I had a new boss, and that boss told me that first day that life is all about relationships, building and maintaining them. So think about your family relationships, your alumni. You know, Arda just graduated from a program called GPODS, the Global Policy Diploma, GPODS, Global Policy Diplomacy and Sustainability Program. He made new connections there. Some people go to International Space University. You create connections there. And you're in career paths, you join groups, and these relationships not only sustain you and support you and motivate you, but they can help you find the next opportunities in your career. So it's really important to think about the importance of relationships. So you may recognize this person, Arda. We have Arpit on here. He's one of the people I interviewed for the significance of relationships. For others of you in the space industry, you may be familiar with Ruvimbo Samanga, who's a space lawyer from Zimbabwe. And another person is Andrea Prazakova, who, believe it or not, I know she's originally from Europe, but lives in Dubai. So amazing interviewing these thought leaders for this chapter. But I'm going to talk about Ruvimbo and the significance of these relationships. What she learned was to appreciate the value of networking. Now, remember, she's wanting to become a space lawyer from a country in Africa called Zimbabwe. Like at the time, they didn't even have a space agency, they don't have a launch facility, they don't have astronauts. Like, this is a really challenge. And it's not just Zimbabwe that has this challenge. I was on a Women Tech Network webinar where we had women space leaders, and one of them was a space lawyer. It wasn't Ruvimbo, it was another person. And we were talking about career paths into the space industry. And after that Women Tech Network webinar, a woman from Namibia reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, I've always wanted to be a space lawyer, but I was told I can't be a space lawyer because I live in Namibia and there's no space and, you know, it's an impossible dream. And by watching your webinar, I was able to see that I can be a space lawyer from Africa, from Namibia, that there is a pathway for me. So it's really important to join these organizations. Now, I said Women Tech Network. Now, Women Tech Network is open to men and women. They have mentoring programs. I think right now they're actually looking at opening their mentoring program. So I highlight it's open to men and women to be proteges as well as mentors. There's also Space Generation Advisory Council has mentoring opportunities, also a great network that you can join to find your path. And then you can look at other amazing organizations. So find these organizations you can join, find these mentoring programs. And the other thing I want to highlight is that you can be a mentor to someone else, no matter where you are in your career. So I encourage you, not only find a mentor, but be a mentor because we need to continue to give back to others. And so I'll leave it on this note with Orbiting Connections. I highlight Audrey Hepburn, who's a famous actress, but also humanitarian. And what she says is, as you grow older, you would discover that you have two hands, one to help yourself and one to help others. As you climb, you should be reaching up, but reaching to help the next person come with you. And so that's a little bit about what's in this book called What Space Got to Do with It. 10 life lessons for personal growth. There's a lot more, there's 10 full chapters. We've only covered a few, and there's more in-depth stories, as well as I highlighted, there's more tools in there that can help you take some of these insights and transform them into action, as well as other groups that you can join and network. So with that, Julio, I'll look in the chat to see if there's anybody else. You did. Jose is in the chapter. Arda, I did capture Jose's story. So Jose Hernandez applied multiple times to become an astronaut for NASA. I believe it was 12 times before he was finally accepted. There's a Netflix movie out called A Million Miles Away. He also has a book. So think about it. Year after year after year after year after year after year, he applied to be a NASA astronaut and was turned down, but he did not give up. He kept figuring out, what can I do to be better? How can I improve? What is NASA looking for? I want to be an astronaut. And he became an astronaut. So don't take that first attempt in learning, that failure, as failure. It's an opportunity to learn, grow, and continue on your journey to accomplish your dreams. So I'm open to answer any questions. If not, I'm Shelli Brunswick, and it's been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing all of you around the galaxy.
Yes, congratulations, Shelly, for your presentation. Very motivating. And also, yeah, open to questions. If not, I have some.
Wonderful. I look forward to hearing them.
Um, okay, how do you envision the future of space exploration and also the future of humanity connected with space?
Well, I think that's a really great and exciting question. I talked about a little bit about Artemis. First we think about Apollo 60 years ago. The goal was to put a man on the moon and safely return him to Earth. This time with the Artemis generation, the goal is to go to the moon, to stay, and then go on to Mars. And this time it's not the US in a space race with another country. This time there are more than 90 countries already operating in space. There's more than 40 countries that have signed the Artemis Agreement, the Artemis Accords, to partner that we are collaborating to go to the moon together and then on to Mars. And that talks about that ecosystem. But then think about how space technology will create new economic opportunities. We think about growing food in space in austere environments, in a controlled environment. Well, we can use that technology here on Earth to grow food to feed our hungry planet. We can think about healthcare in space. One of the people I interview for the book, you haven't seen that chapter, is Dr. Vanessa Farsadaki, who is the mother of astromedicine. And she talks about, we think about space medicine, that's one career, but look at how many doctors are on Earth. We're going to need the same amount of doctors in in orbit, if we're in low Earth orbit, or we're going to need the same kind of specialty doctors on the moon, and we're going to need different doctors on Mars. Each planet has a different climate, a different gravity, a different challenge. So what's going to happen is as we go on to the moon and Mars, new careers are going to be developed. There will be individuals that will go on to the moon and Mars, but most jobs are going to be here on Earth, and how we take that space technology and help citizens here on Earth, whether that's Earth observation, looking at climate change, looking at better weather predicting. Right now, Julio, there are 2.6 billion people on this planet that do not have internet access. That because they may live in island nations and you can't lay fiber optic cable to them. The only way we can bring them into the digital era is with satellite communication, satellite internet. And think about what it would be like to bring these citizens in, 2.6 billion people. So now they have Earth observation, they have better weather forecasting that helps them with agriculture, but they can also now be part of the global economy. We're going to close that digital divide. They're going to be part of the next wave, which is the knowledge economy. So there's a lot of untapped potential right here on Earth that space technology is the only way we can close that digital divide and create that opportunity for other citizens. So it's an amazing time to be part of the space industry, whether you want to do space exploration or you want to look at taking space technology and utilizing it right here on Earth.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. Yes. Other question that I'd like to do, what advice do you have for young professionals interested in space industry too, in terms of career?
I think there's a lot of careers. When we think back to the Apollo era, I highlighted, it was two nations in a space race, primarily government workers, STEM professionals, and they were male. But the biggest thing I say is STEM professionals. 60 years ago, that was primarily it. Now, today, 60 years later, with the Artemis era and that legislation from policy, you're seeing this commercialization side of the space industry. Now, with commercialization, we need all careers. So, yes, we still need those STEM professionals. We still need Jose Hernandez. We still need those rocket scientists and astronauts, but we also need marketing. We need educators. We need policymakers and program managers and entrepreneurs and investors. So there's now more than 50 different careers in the space industry. And here's the most exciting part. The careers are continuing to change and grow and evolve because we're looking at new technologies coming on board that will not only disrupt space or enhance space, but other sectors. So artificial intelligence. I'm sure all of you have heard about AI. Artificial intelligence can help with things like unlocking the universe and understanding the cosmos and the origins of how our universe started. But it can also help us unlock healthcare benefits. Right now we know we can use space do healthcare in space microgravity environments, whether that's cancer research or pharmaceutical development. But think about taking space technology, pharmaceutical development, and artificial intelligence, and how much more fast, rapidly we can bring new technologies, new life-saving innovations to market. Whereas in right now, it can take 10, 15 years to bring a new drug trial to market to save people's lives, especially cancer treatment, the way cancer cells grow, or they're now doing some stem cell research in microgravity and how it's changing things. I actually know a doctor, Dr. Nicole Wagner, and there's a disease called macular degeneration, and it happens to older people where slowly they go blind, and there's no cure. Now, what Dr. Wagner is doing is she is working with NASA and Space Tango, and she is 3D printing lens replacements on the International Space Station. Because the way that the material lays in the microgravity environment is better than it is here on Earth. So it is a business case. She's not a space person. She's a doctor trying to solve a disease that's affecting people here on Earth. She's using space to bring this technology to market. So hopefully we will see this technology in the next decade or less that will help solve blindness for people around the planet who get macular degeneration. So Julio, the sky is not the limit. There are no limits.
Thanks so much, Shelly, for your considerations. And also, someone has more than one questions for Shelly. No? Okay. Okay, thanks so much. We are is concluding this session and also stop the recording.